To be honest, I've never reviewed a deck before, but I guess there's always a first time for everything. This deck comes from TradeCardsOnline.com and was created by the user duskfall. Though to be upfront, I have made a few slight tweaks to the original deck, and I'll explain my reasons when I get to the appropriate parts of this review. One of the first changes I made to this deck was to replace Pinkie Pie Pokepony with DJ Pon 3 Party Starter, and I basically have two reasons for why I made this change. One, Vinyl's draw ability is very useful for this deck's overall strategy, since it relies on playing low-cost cards from your hand. Being able to fill your hand back up with Vinyl's boost ability allows you to save on action tokens, and she is just as easy, if not easier than Pinkie Pie Pokepony to flip. Two, while the original's main character's flipped ability was dangerous, it can be avoided or negated by an intelligent player. As such, the ability is never particularly useful in my experience. In all my time playing this game, I've only ever been able to utilize Pinkie Pie Pokepony's ability once. The friends in this deck are primarily one-cost friends with no power requirements, and the few cards with power requirements are all pink. This makes for a deck that can quickly spam problems with low-cost friends with 1 or 2 power, but leaves the deck feeling weak in terms of actual power cards. In fact, this deck's main strategy seems to be spamming low-cost friends from the hand in order to score an early lead, but maintaining that lead is a major issue with this deck. I also made a slight change here by replacing Cherry Jubilee Queen of the Hill with Swansong Fun-Loving Dubante, I believe it's how you pronounce it. My original reason for this switch was because I didn't believe I had enough copies of the original card, since it is a fixed card that can only be found in starter decks. I was mistaken in that belief, but I think the switch might be for the best anyway, since it allows the player to potentially build a powerful friend through the use of its pumped effect. This deck build doesn't utilize any resource cards, but does utilize 3 unique event cards. Though I do find the inclusion of one of these event cards rather iffy. Though I guess I should list the 3 events and their main purpose. Let's Get This Party Started is a rather straightforward inclusion in this deck. It allows the player to draw 3 cards for a single action token. This cuts down the amount of tokens you need to spend on drawing cards by 2, and is a highly important card in a deck that relies on playing from the hand. A Vision from the Future is another card with a clear purpose and a decent addition to this deck, since it offers the player a chance to win face-offs and attempts to address one of the major weak points of this deck. Though I'll discuss the details in a little bit on that issue. And finally, we have Downright Dangerous, a highly iffy card in the grand scheme of things. This card allows you to kill weak friends that have a power stat of 2 or less at the expense of 2 action tokens. And while this seems like a good card, the side fact is that giving up 2 action tokens to kill an opposing friend is largely a waste in my opinion. Unless you use this card to kill something like Spring Forward while it's still at the opposing player's home, this card offers little in terms of benefits that wouldn't be outweighed by simply playing friends from your hand. About the only other useful reason I could see for playing this card would be to kill an opponent's off-color friends in order to prevent them from addressing their own problems. This deck build doesn't utilize any Trollmakers, which is a shame, since I think there is one Trollmaker in particular that could have been useful with this deck build, and it may be a change I'll make to the deck in my own time in order to see if it offers improved performance. But as it stands, I don't have anything to really discuss about this topic, at least not for this deck. The problem deck for this deck build is what you'd expect for the most part if you are familiar with this card game. It relies on problems with low power requirements to solve, and offers the player a chance to look at the next problem in order to decide to put on the top or bottom of the problem deck. It also includes Mean Meanie Pants, which allows both players to draw a card when it is revealed. A card that is a double-edged sword in my opinion, since it allows the opposing player to also acquire a card. But sometimes you have to take a slight risk in order to maintain your own overall strategy. About the only truly inspired card in this deck is Cheering Up a Friend. A card that can only be confronted if you have 4 characters at its problem. So even though it has low power requirements, it can be a pain to solve if you don't have a lot of low-cost friends like this deck does. This deck contains 2 major strengths in my opinion. This deck can usually confront the initial problems played by both players within the first 3 turns, if not within the first 2 turns. As such, this deck can easily take the lead early on in a match. 2. This deck by and large is comprised of common and uncommon cards, which makes it easy for most people to construct, but it does contain 1 rare card and 1 fixed card in both its original design and in my slight redesign. On the other hand, it has major weaknesses, or I should say a major weakness, since I guess you consider the weaknesses combined together, considering it's all about face-offs really. This deck is horrible at winning face-offs of any kind, whether it be for problems or troublemakers. This can largely be attributed to the low average power of the cards within the draw deck, which works out to about 1.42 if I add all of the cards within the deck up correctly. As such, this deck struggles to win face-offs of any kind. It can't win problem face-offs reliably, it can't win trollmaker face-offs consistently either, and it can barely win double face-offs. In fact, it usually loses those too. While this deck does include two cards to work around this issue, with a Vision from the Future offering the player a chance to potentially win face-offs, where your friend's power is equal to the opponent's by giving you a guaranteed flip of power of 5, or with Trollmakers, I guess, as well. The other option is to utilize Snips and Snails, problem solvers, in order to replace a problem. This will kill face-up Trollmakers, so you don't have to deal with them anymore, and can potentially allow you to score bonus points again on the new problem, since everything that was there has to be moved away from it. And that's about it for major downsides with this deck. While this deck does present a rather interesting strategy that is fun to play with as long as your friend's deck doesn't contain a large amount of Trollmakers to stall you out, it isn't a particularly competitive deck in the grand scheme of things either. The inability to reliably win problem face-offs with this deck means that your opponent will quickly catch back up to you score-wise and will always be within a threatening distance to win the game. This can make for some rather tense and enjoyable matches in casual play, but isn't ideal for tournaments. And it's also hard to ignore the fact that this deck still feels like it could use a little editing to give it a better chance of winning even in casual play, since this deck struggles to maintain its early lead when you get into the mid to late game, or at least that is what I've learned from playing both with and against it.